Swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge. If so, please say, I do. Please begin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Argall, Senator Carney, and the members of the Senate Education Committee. We appreciate an invitation to be here today. As you said, my name is Chris Linkey. I'm a registered architect and a partner at RLPS Architects in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We've been in business for almost 70 years and have worked on literally hundreds of school projects. I submitted my written testimony previously, so I'm not going to reread that. I'll be brief in my comments. The challenges public schools face with their building conditions are complicated, diverse, and pervasive across the Commonwealth. My testimony provided a real-life example of how a rural school district is impacted by not having the financial support of the PlanCon process. The AIA believes that PlanCon needs to be reinstated as a financial support system in which all school districts have an equal opportunity to provide appropriate school facilities and learning environments for the future. I'm here to answer any questions on my written testimony or in general, but I would like to turn it over to Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Argall, for this opportunity today, Senator Carney and all the other senators and members of this committee. Thank you very much for addressing this very important topic. My name is Michael Kelly. I'm an architect with KCBA Architects. I'm also the architectural representative on the Senator's School Safety Committee. So I'm very honored to be part of that and can certainly answer any questions that you may have today on school safety. I'm also a William Allen High School graduate, so I'm a product of Pennsylvania public schools, of two young children in public schools as well, so obviously very personally passionate about public education. So much so that 7 years ago, almost to this week, I did this exact thing at Mayes High School in front of a committee very similar to yours, talking about the need for PlanCon funding. We joked about how cars have actually upgraded their safety and their technology over years. We talked about how phones have changed how they look and their safety and technology, and we've all kind of agreed that those are all very good upgrades and just part of technology and modern progress. What we also talked a little bit about is how our schools have not done that. Way too often our schools are kind of just left as existing conditions. One of the questions earlier was about, well, what do you do if there's no PlanCon? And there are some great school districts that are doing their best, trying to be fiscally responsible, but there are far too many school districts that the answer to that question is they're doing nothing. So some of these images and some of the testimony, when I was asked to do written testimony, I pulled out my testimony from 7 years ago. I read it and went, yeah, that still works. I don't really have to change too much. Now I did update that. But unfortunately, a lot of those issues still remain. So I wanted to share and some visuals here. You know, this is an existing classroom, a classroom here that's desperately trying to deal with just humidity issues in their space. Classrooms that are in basements, that are inaccessible. You can't even get down there if you have accessibility issues. This is a classroom in Pennsylvania. This is a picture from last week of a classroom. This is happening right now. Classrooms where, again, HVAC issues, we've heard that a couple times today, are being mitigated with ceiling fans, but the ceiling fan is unsafe, so we got to put that in a cage. So this is an elementary school classroom that a child may be going in. A lot, you heard Dr. McGarry talk about oversized or undersized classrooms with way too many students in that. We see that far too many times, too much furniture in there. Kids have to kind of weave their way then through unsafe spaces to get in and out of their general classrooms. Special education, because so many of our buildings are so old, they didn't have special education classes, really, back in the 50s. Now we do so much better of ideas of monitoring those things and understanding those things. My wife's a speech therapist. Her office in a lot of these schools is in a hallway. Just sitting out in the hallway or a desk in the middle of a space. You're taking children that may need, that have the most attentive issues or challenges with attention, and you're putting them out in the corridor. That's also a bit of a fire hazard. Areas like this where you've got filing cabinets and desks, this has created a 4-foot wide hallway in a classroom or in a school. Open pod systems are still around. We still see this. Again, these are pictures just from a couple of weeks ago. Classrooms like this, where elementary school students are walking in, there's no doors, there's no windows, there's no way to secure those spaces. They're walking through and around storage spaces. You know, we've got laundry tubs sitting out full of supplies. This is a current situation in our schools today. You know, spaces like this that, you know, we talk about areas with sensory needs. Walking into a space like this just overwhelms a child. And again, there's really no way to lock those types of spaces down. In some schools that did have open pods where they did try to lock some things down, you're fighting against oftentimes geometry like a circle here, where again, you're creating a 4-foot wide hallway, or partitioning things off with particle board. There's no sound insulation in there. There's no, that's not a very secure wall. It's certainly not a fire-rated wall. So these, all to make a classroom that may not have a window in it anyway. So these are all systems and things that we're seeing in modern schools today. Schools that are still using coal as a primary heating source, or exposed electrical transformers right down the hallway from a student's classroom. A lot of these schools are trying their best. They're giving, you know, positive messages and things like that, like, hey, let's, you know, we're all here for good things, but it's hard to portray that when this is the door to your classroom. You know, a child walking down to a basement, walking through this door to get into their classroom. A couple of months ago, we were honored by U.S. Deputy Secretary Ms. Martin to come to a school, a local school, to walk through and see some of the existing conditions and see how some of the ESSER fundings were being utilized there. And I shared this image with her while we were there. I said, all right, it's in March, but it was kind of a warm day in March, yet they hadn't turned over the air conditioning system yet, so the heat was still on. To mitigate that, they turned the air conditioning on, so now you've got two things fighting each other. And because that really wasn't working, they opened the window as well. So we literally had two different air systems, all that kind of just going right outside anyway. Meanwhile, both of them were just shaking and making noises. That's not a very good environment for our children to be learning. Mentioned earlier about the Taj Mahal. We're not talking about knocking everything down and starting a Taj Mahal. We're talking about sometimes a new building, just a new school, nothing over the top, just something that's adequate. This building in particular replaced that building. 3 circles. As good as we are as architects, we can't renovate our way out of a circle. This was a building that had open pods, pie-shaped classrooms. There was no way to secure a corridor. 5 feet down the hallway, kids would disappear. They had massive issues there. So that was replaced with this building back here. Again, not the Taj Mahal, just something much more adequate and modern. As has been said a lot, most of these projects are renovation projects. Here's a library that really no one was using, and we came in and just kind of updated that. New furniture, new lighting, brighter colors, things like that that are much more adaptive to public education today. This was, in the same school, this was the first thing you walked into, a storage closet that no one was using and a classroom that was empty, and we just took the walls out. That's it, just there in that little part of the lobby there, and created spaces that were much more engaging for project learning and areas for students to engage in, and provided a little bit of a modern feel to that high school. The rest of the high school just got a paint job, that was nice, but just having that library, just having that new entrance space like that, spaces like that were desperately needed. At Altoona, we had a school that was 100 years old. You can see not a lot of windows in this 4-story, actually had a basement, so it was a 5-story high school. Most of the classrooms were actually undersized, less than the state minimum, and they had far more students in them than they needed. And this was a project that replaced just that building. It was that high school is actually 2 buildings. So we just replaced that, but it allowed us to pull 9th grade into that area from their middle school. Their middle school building was somewhat new, so we pulled 6th grade into that middle school. Pulling 6th grade out of their K-6 elementary schools allowed 10 elementary schools to immediately meet their capacity concerns without even touching them. We just moved 6th grade into the middle school. Now they had science labs, which they didn't have before. We moved 9th grade into this newer building that offered all kinds of different academics as well. What that old building didn't have was a wood shop. This building now offered that opportunity for the students. A metal shop, robotics labs, science commons. It gets a little cold out there in your state college, so to be able to have a space like this where they can do experiments in an enclosed space throughout the year was important. Their television studio, one of the features and pride of their district was in closet in the basement, we brought that up and created a much larger area for that. Music space that was in a windowless area in the basement, not accessible, provided natural light. Visual arts was a pride of their program as well. Stuffed in a basement that no one saw, we brought that out of that area. All of those projects happened because they were eligible and received PlanCon funding. All of those conversations about we don't want to raise taxes, we have to be fiscally responsible, all of those things happen, and they are important conversations for school districts to have, but they were able to do this just because of that a little bit of additional funding, sometimes as little as 14 cents, 12 cents on the dollar. So we're not talking about 90% of that being funded by the state. Sometimes just that 10%, that 12% is what gives the school district the ability to make those types of improvements. Back in 2014, you had asked about some studies. Back in 2014, PDE did do a school facilities study, and it showed that most of the buildings in Pennsylvania were built before 1970. So a lot of that is coming right out of World War II. A lot of that's before the energy crisis. A lot of that is certainly before some of the building sciences that we do today. So PlanCon came around in the 70s. Actually, school funding started in Pennsylvania in the 50s. PlanCon started in the 70s in an effort to help out with that and establish some credentials and just some criteria to meet in order to get PlanCon funding. And as we said, Act 70 in 2019 modernized that system, take it from 11 forms to 4, understood a little bit more that not every school is going to have typewriting studios, that's still on the forms, planetariums and things like that that we don't always see in our schools today. So it upgraded those forms and understood how modern elementary schools were being run. There was no credit in the past for a music room or a library. Imagine an elementary school without a library, but in the 70s that was not part of the funding formula. So now it is, and it's ready to go. That's the good news. We're ready. We have that mechanism set. It's been approved. We just need to turn that on. When you look at the PlanCon website now, it talks about here's all the forms, we're ready to go, but the 2023-24 school year, we're not accepting. The shop is closed because there is no funding for that. So the forms are there, the mechanism is there. Those forms for Act 34 hearings, we're still using the older forms. So even starting there, allowing the newer forms to be the requirements for the Act 34 requirements of making sure that we're staying within spending limits, that would be important. That would certainly help school districts in a lot of different ways, and certainly turning that program back on, as we mentioned, bringing a lot of those things down. So when we talk about indoor air quality, how can we improve that? How can we do better for the next COVID piece? Our point today is fund PlanCon, bring the funding back on to allow for that. Asbestos and hazardous materials, you can kind of see here a school that got started. They actually had a leak. They had to rip up part of their school, but the rest of it still has that asbestos flooring. This is being remediated right now as part of an ESSER fund project in a school district. This is going to be remediated this summer, but they weren't touching it until they had ESSER funding. And as we said, that goes away in a year. So you want to improve those things. PlanCon is that catch-all. PlanCon can address those things. Here's a school, that kind of half-circle school I showed before. To get to those half circles, you either got to go up a half level or down a half level. It's not really ADA accessible. They have a chairlift, but that takes about 2 minutes to get up and down, and no one can get up and down it. So there's a big difference between accessibility and ADA friendly. That's not a very ADA friendly way for a child with the most physical needs to be able to achieve that. So again, we want to fix those things. Let's restart the PlanCon funding. School safety, again, one of the things I promote the most on that panel. There's a lot of money going towards mental health and a lot of money going towards nurses and guidance counselors. That's extremely important, and we've advocated for that throughout all of that Act 44 money. And my point was always, you want to fix the buildings, let's just turn PlanCon back on, because that's the mechanism where we can integrate a lot of the best practices for school security. So again, we're trying to find kind of equitable school environments throughout the state. Yes, there are some school districts that have some very nice buildings, but the predominant school districts mostly throughout the state do not. There is an inequality through the state between buildings that are from the 20s that could be renovated but are not, or buildings that just need to be replaced or modernized. So again, let's hit that start button and start that process back up again. And the good news is all of those forms and mechanisms are already modernized and set and ready to go. So thank you.